Good Yom Tov Eden. L'chaim, l'chaim. Yeah. Nach die alle Grace Giluyim, there's not not much we can say. However, I was asked that for the benefit of the viewers that are not necessarily here physically, and English-speaking viewers who couldn't necessarily follow some of the other speakers, that we give a little bit of a recap of Chof Sivan. So the Farbrengen will continue afterwards. But this will be just a little intermission. And we'll journey together to try to answer the question, what is Chof Sivan? Rabbi Olten had gered wegen Matan Torah. But in order for Matan Torah to happen, there had to be Yetzias Mitzrayim. And Kol Hamarbe L'Saper V'Yetzias Mitzrayim Areza Meshubach. The more details we know, the greater the intensity of the appreciation and the celebration. The Rebbe always wanted that every single detail should be printed and collected and known. There's a new krach of Igris Kodesh that's about to go to print. And there's a letter in there where the Rebbe writes to someone in Eretz Yisrael in response to him mentioning that he was with the Rebbe's uncle, Reb Shmuel, when he was fashikt. So the Rebbe said, please send me every single detail. And I thank you in advance very, very much. And if it's too much of a tirche for you to write everything, I'm sure the Bachrim from Chabad will be happy to come to you to hear all the pratim, and they will send it in. So the question that I was asked to answer was, why, how did it come about that we would make a kavitz for Chof Sivan Yovel Shonim? But it's not a short answer, but we'll try to do it under the time constraints after all of the Giluyim was gehert. And once again, the letter that Rabbi Kamen mentioned, it's a letter that the Frierdiker Rebbe wrote, Beis der Chodesh Tammuz Tafshin Aleph, and it was written to Viserufzichen bei unserem Mishpache Zede Yisrael, Rabbi Saul Jacobson. And this letter really is key to understanding the process and appreciating the ness of the Rebbe's Hatzalah. And the Frierdiker Rebbe writes, I'm just going to say it again because of the importance of it, Kol regesh yedidus ve'ava ve'chiba shehineni roya ve'shemeya me'echod me'anash ve'talmidi hatmimim hein beinam lebein atzmam ve'hein beinam lebeini Goyrem li keiras ruach ein kates, ki zehu kol inyan achsidus. So Chof Ches is kayach, and ledaitcha, like Rabbi Greenberg talked about so eloquently. The oisius that the Rebbe speaks about Chof Sivan are extraordinary. Every single sikha has extraordinary oisius, revolutionary oisius. The whole transformation of Chodesh Tammuz from being a Chodesh that we mourn into a Chodesh HaGeula comes because of Koyach Sivan. The Koyach for Tammuz to be transformed to a Chodesh HaGeula comes because Chof Sivan is Shabbos Mevarchim. We know that the Tnufa Chadasha that the Rebbe writes is a result of the Frierdiker Rebbe coming to America, but it didn't happen until the Rebbe came. So the Frierdiker Rebbe coming was only the Hakdama. It was the Hakdama for the Rebbe to come And then the Tnufa Chadasha to take Hafatzas HaMayonis to a whole new level. With Rebbe Retarum Bariches. Tavshemem test that Farbrengen that Rabbi Greenberg mentioned is an unbelievable quote there. The Rebbe says that he had the opportunity to assist the Frierdiker Rebbe in his work, to stand by his side, biz kamoicha mamish. So it's Hayom Meil in his Karim Vinasim and all the brachis and the hashpois and the keiches are all betokvam v'im b'gvuris shmeinim shana. But let's talk about the Nes itself. So there's the Ruchniistic angle that I'm not an expert in, but we all know the letter that Chof Fagin, the Frierdiker Rebbe's secretary, writes to Rabbi Yisrael Jacobson in the winter of Tafshin, that the Rebbe does not want to come to America. And the Frierdiker Rebbe has Agmas Nefesh because of it. And therefore he's asking Rabbi Jacobson from New York to write a letter, a Michtav Shichnua, to the Rebbe in Paris to try to convince him how important it is that he come to be by the Frierdiker Rebbe's side. To bring in the younger Chassidim, younger people, Tzutzi and the Junge, with all the Lashonis there. But the Rebbe is Eson B'daitei, and therefore we're having difficulty to try to make this happen. Now we have the interview from Yankel Lax, that the Rebbe himself says that he's not ready for it. But das is Beruchnius. Begashmius, that year and a half for the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin was very, very difficult. There's a kavitz that was just printed, has all the correspondence and all the letters. It's obligatory reading for every bacher, every chassid, thanks to the Vadat Mimim. But Sotam Gekos Gesund, the Frierdiker Rebbe was very pained by the fact that things weren't moving fast enough to bring the Rebbe over. And just to put it in perspective, we're talking about the term that's used so frequently, a Holocaust survivor. The Rebbe said on himself that I know firsthand because I passed through the mouth of the inferno. Pia Teifes. And there's the famous letter that the Rebbe writes that I understand what it means, the Holocaust, because I myself lost family. The Rebbe survived the Holocaust. Pashat Kipshute. The burning flames that killed millions of Yidden. The Frierdiker Rebbe was waiting for him to come, b'kiloyin einayim. Couple examples, just in short. I'm not going to cover all the material. For that you have to read the kavitz. But just a couple of tidbits that give the perspective of the Nes HaAtzola. The Frierdiker Rebbe arrives for Pesach, Tafshin, he goes to Lakewood. It's my neighboring town to my Mokem HaShlichus. And in Achron Shel Pesach in the Farbrengen, the Frierdiker Rebbe says that he is looking to make a sefer of Minhagi Chabad and Pisgomi Chabad. However, in order for a person to be able to make this sefer, he has to have the following criteria. Atifer Pnimi, a Gruntiker Mesuder, Mitadas Rechovo Va'amuka. The Rebbe is waiting. Frierdiker Rebbe is waiting for the Rebbe to come to be able to fulfill this. And there's a whole arichis there, how everything that he sets his eye on, the Eibishter helps him that it should happen. In Tammuz, the Frierdiker Rebbe adds the Rebbe as a member of Agudas Siddi Chabad. That's how much he's looking forward to him coming. I heard from Reb Moshe Groner that a few weeks before the Rebbe came, the Frierdiker Rebbe mentioned by a Farbrengen, I'm singing the Beinani. And it seems it wasn't sung accurately, and the Frierdiker Rebbe said, Bald wird kommen mein Edim, und wird singen the Beinani. And Taka, a couple weeks after the Rebbe came, Yud Beis Tammuz, he asked the Rebbe to sing the Beinani, and the Rebbe sang the Beinani. That's in addition to Reb Michel's Lotchever's Nigun. The Frierdiker Rebbe followed every single correspondence that was going back and forth between the State Department and the lawyers in Washington and the council. And he even asked that every letter that came in English be translated in Yiddish by Reb Nissen Mindel in order that the Frierdiker Rebbe should be able to see every single detail that was going on in the whole parsha of the Hatzalah. Now let's move over, and of course we know that the Frierdiker Rebbe writes very strong Lashonos, that from the Allah Zisereid, all the sweet talk has not brought any action, month after month after month after month, and there's no movement, and the Rebbe can't get his visa, and he can't come. And ich bin sehr zerbrochen, I'm very broken because of it. So imagine the Frierdiker Rebbe and his family, what they're going through during this year and a half from when they arrive until the Rebbe comes. Now let's move over to Paris. The Rebbe and the Rebbetzin are running. They're running from Paris to Vichy, to Nice, to Marseille, to Lisbon. The parsha with the visas is such an intense parsha with dozens and dozens and dozens of letters. He mentioned before, first the Rebbe applied for a visa as an engineer. He thought it would be easier. Then they introduced this concept of the hierarchy from Yehuda Gerari. Then it was decided to wait until the Frierdiker Rebbe is rescued because they thought that perhaps it could compete. So since it was going to take anyway 6 months for the Rebbe's visa, that was the normal time after you applied. So first, the Frierdiker Rebbe should arrive with his family, and then they'll work on the Rebbe's parsha, the Rebbe and the Rebbe. And that's what happened. And then they went back to the issue with the visa. So the State Department asked the question, they want more information because there's now a stira. There are competing applications. There's one application as a member of the hierarchy, which means it's a rabbinic position, which means it's non-quota. It's outside of the quota of how many people are able to be rescued, are able to get visas to emigrate to America. And on the other hand, there's an application for an engineer. And they used it as an excuse not to give the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin their visa. Then the Rebbe transfers the file to Marseille, and Hayas, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, gets involved. And ultimately, the visa arrives. In Chedesh Oder, they tell the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin that their visa is going to come Cholamoid Pesach. And it's not going to be a non-quota visa, but it's going to be a regular visa as an immigrant, because the Rebbe has a Russian background and he's entitled as an immigrant, as an individual. And ultimately, the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin get their visa Cholamoid Pesach Tafshin Aleph. We're talking about from the beginning of Tafshin, when this first starts. Just in the papers from Hayas, so after the Rebbe arrives, and they're settling the finances, because the Frierdiker Rebbe had given a certain amount of money to pay for the expenses. So it ended up that the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin got their tickets from the Bistritzkis. So the Hayas is sending back the money, and they're writing a little cheshbon of what the money was for. And there's $1.20 there with a line item called vaccination. Shine. What is the Rebbe involved with during this whole tkufa? So very bekitzer, but it's a must to understand. Number one, Pashat Mesiris Nefesh Kipshutei for Yiddishkeit, for a Hiddur Mitzvah. And every Yom Tov has a story of Matzis and Tavshin. The Frierdiker Rebbe arranged to send matzahs from Eretz Yisrael, and the Rebbe arranged to send matzahs from Mordechai Chayfetz in Riga. The Maisa with the Esrik, everybody knows, in Tafshin Aleph. The Rebbe asked a Rav for a halachic permission to go on Mesiris Nefesh to get an Esrik, and he didn't receive it, and he went anyway. And the Rebbe found the driver who goes to the border of Italy, Shechter. And the Rebbe goes with him, and he tells the Rebbe, you know, we're going to cross the border. This is very, very dangerous. You better say a tefillah. The Rebbe says, you travel. leave the davening to me. And for a few days, no one knew where the Rebbe was, and he came back with a glowing face with two beautiful esregim. We're talking about mamish mesiras nefesh. There's the story that I heard from Reb David Bezbarodke. Everyone knows now that Pesach Tavshin Aleph, he went to Schweiz to get, the Rebbe asked him to get matzahs from the Schmerling family. Every matzah, every single thing was a whole. The Rebbe went with Reb David Bezbarodke to the train to see him off. And he says to the Rebbe, you look very, very worried. So the Rebbe says, I'm thinking about how I'm going to get mortar. He's about now to go to get matzah. The Rebbe is the mortar. The Rebbe says the story about the karpas. The Rebbe is weggegangen suchen to find an onion. And the Rebbe says, I didn't know if I'm going to see the Rebbe again, my husband. So you're talking about Pashat Mesiras Nefesh Kipshutei for Yiddishkeit. The Maisa with Zanglovsky, with Pas Yisrael and Cholav Yisrael. Then there's the Rebbe's Avas Yisrael. The Rebbe's not just busy with his own visa, the Rebbe's trying to help whoever he could, literally to a point of endangering himself. We all know the story with the $100 bill. It's not a simple story. The Rebbe looked for refugees who didn't have a place, gave them the money to be able to enter the Roshambo hotel just to get in, and then immediately look for another. In a time when every single person was being looked at, the Rebbe Kam had permission to stay in Nice, let alone to go get involved in efforts for other people. Somebody had a big amount of gold, and the Rebbe offered to keep the gold in his room. And the Rebbe tells the Rebbe, das ist doch a sakona. The Rebbe says, das Yiddische Geld. Keep it in the room, and then ultimately they took it and they smuggled it out some other way. There was a story with a woman who had to emigrate and she was running away, and the Rebbe ran with her to make sure that everything is taken care of to be able to get to the... Then there's Pashat Hafotza Samayonis. Teire, Chassidus. The Rebbe is busy writing Rishimis. Just from Vichy alone, where the Rebbe spent 7 or 8 weeks, there are 6 Shabbos Rishimis of the Rebbe spoke Shabbos in Shul. Whole Arichis about Abar Chayovim Lahedis. The Rebbe is in the middle of a Mokim Sakana, Sakana's Nefashis. He doesn't know when he's going to get a visa, if he's going to get a visa. And he's speaking in Shul about Abar Chayovim Lahedis. Tu B'Shvat in Marseille, we all know the Rebbe went to Marseille because of the visa. He didn't live in Marseille, he lived in Nice. But when he went to Marseille, he went into the shul, and there's the famous story that Zalman Schechter says over, how the Rebbe spoke a whole long arichis about Tu B'Shvat, Chamish B'Shvat. There was an orphanage outside of Marseille. The Rebbe made sure to visit the orphanage, to deal with the kids, to speak to the kids, to give guidance to those who were running it. Learning with children himself. Then on top of all this, the Rebbe is worried about what's going on by the Frierdiker Rebbe. The Rebbe writes a letter after Pesach, and the Frierdiker Rebbe was in Lakewood, Tafshin. I don't hear anything what's going on. And don't, he writes to Berel Chaskin, one of the Chassidim in America. Don't skimp on your words. Make sure you write all the details the way they are, Lepoil. Not to make it sound good, including the Sichis. Is anybody writing the Sichis? Proshas Yemei Chag Pesach. That's what's on the Rebbe's mind in Nice. Whole process of sending thousands of dollars through Bezbarodka. The Rebbe is involved in sending the money from where he is, which is extremely dangerous, to the Frierdiker Rebbe in America. With so many other pratim, this is just the tip of the iceberg. And the Rebbetzin writes that she feels bad that the Frierdiker Rebbe is putting in so many keiches, so much keiches, to be able, just for that we should be able to get visas. Okay, so they finally get the visas, Chol Hamoed Pesach. Now they have to get transit visas to go to Lisbon to get on the ship. So they leave Nice after 10 months. I actually heard a story from the Shliach in Toulouse. He mentioned it before. Mr. Sangalovsky. Rabbi Matisov told me that he heard from a Yid that the Rebbe came through Toulouse on the way to Lisbon to the ship. It's not known how the Rebbe got from Marseille, from Nice, to Lisbon. But according to this story, it was by train. The train went north and then west. And the stop was in Toulouse, and then from Toulouse to Spain, and from Spain to the coast city of Lisbon. The Rebbe was in a hotel in Toulouse overnight, and he reached out to a Yid who lived in Toulouse, and he invited him to come meet him in the lobby, and the Rebbe spoke to him the entire night about strengthening his Yiddishkeit. The Rebbe left. We all know the Surpa Pinta. I remember like 20-something years ago when the search engines became available for the internet, so I typed in Surpa Pinta. Up until then, we had a black and white picture of the ship. We wanted to have a colored picture of the ship. Pops up a picture with the yellow chimney. Funnel. Thank you. The Rebbe and the Rebbetzin arrived in 770, Alavesen, the Bruchim Aboim, etc. The suitcase, we had the opportunity to get the pictures of the suitcase from Rabbi Kunin when we were printing the Tzaddik L'Melech, with the Rebbe's signature on it. One of the people that came to greet the Rebbe in 770 was Leibush Heber. And Rebbe Osher Heber, Alav Shalom, tells the story how he embraced the Rebbe, Mirev Simcha, and the Rebbetzin commented, Adas ist emes a gute Freund. And there's actually a very interesting story because the Hebers were also in Paris when the Rebbe was there. They didn't know if they should leave. So he came to discuss with the Rebbe, should I go? And the Rebbe says, mit Abschittes, das darf man fragen beim Rebbe, beim Schwer. But how are you going to write a letter now? There's a war going on. The Frierdiker Rebbe is in bombed out Warsaw. So the Rebbe says, du darfst mishtadel sein, schicken a telegram. You have to make an effort to send a telegram. If the telegram doesn't go through, that's the Rebbe's problem. So he goes to the office of the telegram, and he waits online, and they tell him there's no telegrams. Hater Agaton Zayins, he did what he's supposed to do, and after that he said he had an enlightenment that he should actually leave. Shine. Herschel Fogelman describes how the Rebbe came into the Farbrengen. The Rebbe actually sat on the right side by the doors that go to the Merkez, under the plaque, under the only solitary dedication plaque in the entire 770 from the Merkin family. Under that plaque. And Rabbi Edelman says an interesting vart that's not in the Hanocha that we prepared for the Kovitz, that he says that the Rebbe was explaining the inyan of Abba Tzrichim Lahedis, and he said that Sof Kol Sof, everybody benches Hagoimel because everybody wins. The Neshama is taking Golos in them Guf. But Sof Kol Sof, everyone benches Hagoimel because everybody wins. Shine. Just so happens that when we were working on the Tzaddik L'Melech, we got the documents from the Rebbe's mother's arrival, and we realized that the Rebbe's mother, who came together with the Rebbe in Tafshin Zayin, also arrived on Chof Ches Sivan. So obviously, without all of these nisim of the Rebbe coming, the whole Tnufa Chadasha would not have happened. As Rabbi Greenberg talked about Isarus de Losata, just so happens that the letter, the famous letter of Ches Sivan, was written to Reb David Meir Rabinovich, Radam Rabinovich. And Moshe Groner told me that after he passed away, he tried to get all of his letters to bring it to the Rebbe. And first the family wasn't sure they wanted to give it away. It ended up that they did give it away, and he brought it to the Rebbe. The Rebbe was very happy. But it didn't even occur to him to look into the letter to see that there's a letter from Chof Ches Sivan that says that today the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin arrived. In the Yuds. And just to add to what Rabbi Greenberg said, even before the Igris from the Frierdiker Rebbe was printed, in Tafshim Mem Gimel, there was a Kfar Chabad magazine for Yud Aleph Nissen. I remember as a kid, the only colored cover for the Kfar Chabad magazine was Rosh Hashanah and Yud Aleph Nissen. So in the Kfar Chabad of Yud Aleph Nissen, Ber Levin writes an article and he publishes a tzilum of the letter of Chof Ches Sivan, and he writes about it that the day that Rebbe came is Chof Ches Sivan. We went by Kilei Hoya. Keiner sich nicht gehabt, man soll feiern das. To the library. Or before. Also, yeah. Then we come to Tafshin and Aleph. I think we'll make a little break now to show a video clip from Tafshin and Aleph. Where's Yossi? Okay, so while we're waiting, yeah? You know what you're showing? Okay, so how did the thought come up to make a kavitz for Chof Ches Sivan Tafshin and Aleph? Everyone was thinking about different achlotas to do, to bring a koch to the celebration of Chof Ches Sivan. And the truth is, it was a very, very special tkufa that year. The amount of shefa, of giluyim, that the Rebbe was giving us was unprecedented. Giving out kontresim, the sichis and the maimarim on a weekly basis, being magia things non-stop, the tone of the sichis, Chof Ches Nissen, and then the Dvar Malchus, and then everything before it and everything after it. And as a bacher, you're sitting in yeshiva, and we're living with the Rebbe every single day. Besides the davening, and besides the tefillas and the Farbrengens, and learning the sichis and maimarim, Pashut Begashmi is seeing the Rebbe every single day, a few times a day. And if we're not seeing the Rebbe, we're walking by the Rebbe's room to see if the light is on in the room. On the way to yeshiva and on the way from yeshiva, the dormitory was in Adar HaTeireh, so we would walk by 770 to see if the Rebbe's light is on. How did we know what day in the week it was? If it was Monday night, and we were walking back from Adar HaTeireh after Seder at night, the only light in the entire 788 building was in David Feldman's office. Because the Mugadik Sikha had to be given in Monday night, so he stayed late until he finished. So if you saw the light was on at 10 o'clock at night after Seder Sikha is 10:30, so we knew that tonight the Mugadik Sikha is going into the Rebbe. What gelebt mit dem Rebbe? Just so happened that a friend of mine received the entire archive of all the correspondence, the legal correspondence of the Rebbe's case from the Kramer family. And he would invite me to his house every Shabbos during the week to come, to look at the stuff, to read the stuff, etc. And when you start to read the letters, you realize how intense and how difficult and how the whole process was such a taxing one. Back and forth and back and forth, and the difficulty of waiting with not hearing what's going on and not having a communication, and the frustration of the Frierdiker Rebbe, and the lack of communication between the State Department and the Frierdiker Rebbe and the Rebbe. So difficult time. So you start to appreciate what's going on here. I also happened to be working at that time with Rabbi Greenberg on the Yemei Bereishis, and we had received a haskama from the Rebbe to print it under Kahas, which was extremely unprecedented, that the Rebbe's own Toldis and Sipurim and pictures should be printed under Kahas. So I thought to myself, why not? Rather than make an informal tshuva, we should make a formal tshuva. Ask the Rebbe permission to print it under Kahas. Here we have the opportunity to create a Megillas Chof Ches Sivan because we have all the documents. So the whole story, I approached Father Nachzat Mimim, and the Rebbe answered, Kan holas aguch v'tza aguch v'yehei batzlacha rabba. Cautious, but it's a good idea. Be careful, but move ahead. I thought we can get the Sikha from Tafshim Memvav that the Rebbe would be Magiyat in honor of the Kavitz. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. This is already all known. And then Sunday, when the Rebbe mentioned to Rabbi Groner about a Chalukah, so he figured probably the Maimer, the Kuntris Chof Ches Sivan Tavshin Nun Aleph, that the Rebbe gave out the night before on Motzei Shabbos. And the Rebbe said, Nish de Maimer. It just so happened that in the where we were working in Anachas Tamimim, they weren't so excited about the portion of the history part. They were more excited about the Sichis and the Maimarim, because it was unprecedented. To write stories about the Rebbe and to print it on the Kahas, it was like... And of course, the next day comes the major shock. Not only is the Rebbe allowing the Kavitz to be printed, but he's asking to print 10,000 and he's going to give it out himself to every single person on Nashim V'taf. Shock is not even the word. It was like the mixture of emotions. We were like afraid, but humiliated, but excited, but happy. It was like, I mean, imagine the Alter Rebbe is going to give out the Megillas Yutas Kislev together with a Tadfis of the Tanya. The ganze Sache given. So the Rebbe is saying, you think you're doing something, Kavitz Chof Ches Sivan. I'm going to give you back. I'm going to reciprocate Kahena v'Kahena. The Rebbe's personal, private affairs of his rescue, together with the Rebbetzin, is no longer anything private. Now it's being shared with Anashim V'taf over the whole world. And who is the one that's giving it out to everybody? The Rebbe himself. The Rebbe says Avort Yud Beis Tammuz one year that the Frierdiker Rebbe is Teiv Ayin Hu Yevurach, has a good eye. Why? Because the imprisonment, the Meiser, hat genommen für sich. Aber die Geula hat weggegeben Solomon. The celebration, the Yom Tif of Yud Beis Tammuz, he gave to everybody. So the Rebbe is taking the Yom Tif of Chof Ches Sivan and he's handing it over to us and saying, now this is yours. The whole Tnufa Chadasha now becomes the Yerusha of every single Chassid, the Shlichus of every single Chassid, the Achrayis of every single Chassid. It might be strange. It definitely was strange at the time. The Rebbe is giving out his own biography to everybody. Kisveyad of the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin. But something, that's the reality. The reality is that now you could look back and see that it was exactly 9 months before Chav Zayin Adar. We sat down afterwards to Farbrengen, and obviously we were looking at each other. You know, of course, we were very proud that the Rebbe gave out the Kavitz, but were we worthy of this? No, of course not. Absolutely not. But the Rebbe was empowering us to take this story, to take the Rebbe's personal Nes HaAtzola, and make it a Nachlas HaKlal with the intention that we should carry Chof Ches Sivan on in the Shonim HaBois, like the Rebbe said. And this is a reason for celebration of Chof Ches Sivan. And that's what we're celebrating tonight. And that's what we're committing ourselves to today, being 80 years. Gvuris, to take all of those brachas and all of those hashpais and take that achrayis that the Rebbe gave us and bring it to the next level of Tnufa Chadasha. Koyach ugvura nasam bahem liyes meishlim bekerev tevel. That sof kol sof, we should be able to conclude the Rebbe's mission and fulfill the Rebbe's vision. And B'Karev Mamish, we should be able to say the real Mizmor L'Seida. And we should be able to make the bracha, the final bracha, as I so vividly remember, on Chof Ches Sivan Tavshim Mem Tes, at the end of the Farbrengen, after the Rebbe stood up from Mincha and saying Pirkei Avos, right next to me was standing Rabbi Yossel Nimoitin. Rabbi Yossel Nimoitin was an elder Yid. He helped the Rebbe's father in Almata. And Aish Pashut, he picked up a cup. And as the Rebbe stood up to walk out, he looked right at the Rebbe. And without saying a word, started to say, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam. And all of a sudden, the Rebbe's face lit up with such a fatherly smile. The $1 million smile. And the Rebbe looks at him, and as he's saying every single word, the Rebbe makes with his hands, Shehecheyonu, Vikiyimonu, Vihigiyonu, Lizman Hazeh. Chaim.